Thanks everybody for joining us. I'm Mark Weathington, director of the J.C. Ralston Arboretum, and with me is Doug Ruhren, gardens manager here at the J.C. Ralston Arboretum. And whether you're bidding or not, joining our auction, we've got some great plants to talk about, so I think everybody will have fun. But the auction is huge. We've got 300 plus plants up right now. More plants added every day. We'll probably be in the neighborhood of 400 or 500 plants, and they're plants that are starting bidding at $10, and there are plants that I'm sure will be bid up into many hundreds of dollars, but it's kind of good for any budget you might have. So we hope you'll join us for that. Still time to register for that Southeastern Plant Symposium. Coming up, it'll start in just a couple days. Friday, June 10th, and Saturday, June 11th, online or in person. It's going to be a load of fun. So I'm going to start off talking about the first plant. We'll probably talk about a couple plants and then turn it over to each other and probably add some information as we're talking about them as well. Now, we're an arboretum. We do trees and shrubs, but man, I love begonias. I love tropical begonias. I love hardy begonias. I don't grow many tropical ones because I don't water houseplants, but I'm loving these things. This is one, we're not sure of the species, but has these nice, wide, very begonia-like leaves, kind of a purple center. That's really the backside of the leaf, kind of shining through on there. Real beautiful plant. The leaves will get pretty large. They'll get 8-10 inches long, and 2/3 of that is wide. This is one that was collected by our one of our colleagues, Scott McMahon at the Atlanta Botanic Garden, growing in Arunachal Pradesh, in the Mishmi Hills area of Arunachal Pradesh in northeastern India. Things from that region have had varying amounts of cold tolerance, cold hardiness there, but this is one that was collected pretty high up. And he said in Atlanta, so a little bit warmer than here, this plant has survived a couple of winters outside. Now, we've had mild winters around here for the last few years, and so we would say, right now, I would say it's probably a zone 8 plant, maybe zone 8B, the warmer part of zone 8. But we haven't grown it here. Hadn't grown outside for enough years to really know. So it's one of those plants that's great to experiment with. One of the nice things about begonias are they're super easy to propagate. So you can take off a leaf, either cut up the leaf with a vein in it and stick it in potting media, or just take a whole leaf and pin it down so it's flat on some moist potting media and do some cuts through the veins, and you'll get little plantlets there. And I say that because you can take this plant and plant it outside, and before winter, you take some cuttings or divisions and bring a piece inside so you have a backup in case it gets cold. Once it dies back, if you're worried, you can throw some mulch on top of it, some loose mulch. We're pretty warm up until Christmas time around here, so I will often take my Christmas tree when I take it out, and I go through and I cut it down to a post and keep all those branches. And when we're having cold spells, I'll just throw a couple of branches on top of my plant, and then in the season, when the cold stops, I throw it back in the woods, and it's great habitat for bugs, for the critters. So you want it in a shady garden. You want something that's going to stay relatively moist. They love a nice, rich soil. But begonia from the Mishmi Hills of Arunachal Pradesh. Now, I'll switch gears and talk about a woody plant, since I talked about a herbaceous one first. This is Malus, and I got to look at the label to make sure I pronounce this right. Malus niedzweckiana. This Malus is apple. So this is an apple from the Kyrgyzstan region. So I think fairly cold winter, very cold winters, really. Usually pretty dry winters. So we haven't grown this outside. We don't know if it's going to be, some of these plants in the rose family, like apples, can have problems with fire blight and fungus here. We haven't grown it outside. But this is an endangered plant. It is one that has this great dark new growth, and man, it's retained this dark growth. And we actually we have several seedlings. We pulled the darkest one out for you. But the fruit is apparently pretty tasty. I have not had it. It's going to be a small, kind of crabapple-like fruit, but decent enough size that you can actually eat it. Real pretty white with a pink tinged flower. Apple trees are gorgeous in flower. So it's really going to be a showy plant all season long. It's really been touted as one that can be used for breeding with apples, and has been used some for that to actually make them a little bit tougher and bring in that flavor that's really nice. So we're really excited about this, and I don't know that it's ever, I've never seen this species in the U.S. before. And we got it a while back as small plants, just little tiny seedlings. And I'm really excited about what this has the potential for as a landscape plant. So y'all plant it, we'll plant it. Whoever gets this, hopefully you'll report back to me what actually happened. And I want to mention one other thing before we move on to Doug, and that is, if we talk about a plant and you go to our auction site and you don't see it, that just means we haven't gotten it loaded up yet, because we got to get pictures and descriptions and all those sorts of things. So it's coming if we don't have it already. Doug?
Sure. I'm going to start off with the Viburnum. This is Viburnum glomeratum, the variety magnificum. I think you can figure out what magnificum means. I think the foliage is pretty magnificent. Mark brought back seed of this from China. And I always admired the young plants in the nursery, but a number of them were planted last year or the year before, and probably 2 years ago, and they bloomed this spring. The flower head is at least 6 inches across. And it's a white color, not snow white, but a sort of a creamy white, and supposed to make a whole lot of fruit. You saw it in fruit in China, right?
Yeah, and
when you collect
the fruits were large and red. It was gorgeous.
Yeah. So we're hoping we get that kind of fruit set here. And jumping to a very different plant, this is Oxypetalum ceruleum meaning blue. And if the fruit and the flowers resemble an Asclepias, a milkweed, well, they are close relatives. And if you know this plant, you might know it by an older generic name of Tweedia. But it's a hardy herbaceous perennial here, blooming on and off all summer. You'll get a few seedlings in the garden, but it's fairly easy to start from seed if you want to start your own. Do you want me to go on, or you want to jump back in?
Yeah, go ahead and do another one. I just love that blue is not a color we get in our gardens very often.
No.
And if you look it up online, it'll often say that it's an annual or it's not hardy here, but it is. It's a great plant.
Yeah, I have many decades of experience with it in other gardens, going back to the mid 1980s or so. And it is winter hardy in Zone 7. And of course, decades ago, we were having real Zone 7 winters, and it was still overwintering them. There are a number of Hymenocallis in the auction. They're spring and summer flowering bulbs. They are one of several plants that has the common name of spider lily. You can see the flowers are very spidery, but they are not the lycoris that bloom in the late summer, fall, that are also called spider lilies. Hymenocallis means beautiful membrane, and you see there is this lovely membrane that's uniting the base of the stamens. Some are wet site growing, some are desert plants. Many are winter hardy here. Of course, people in the auction might be from warmer climates than here, but really many of them are very beautiful foliage plants through the warmer months, and just really beautiful flower display. And I don't know if all of them are fragrant. A lot of them are fragrant, and the flowers are fresh looking all day, but then they become fragrant in the evening.
Yeah, and I want to, we'll talk about some plants over here, but I want to mention something about those Hymenocalis that people don't necessarily realize, and that's there are a lot of private collectors of plants out there that have some of the best collections, most robust records around them, and when they're private collections, sometimes those people age out and can no longer care for them. And there's a gentleman by the name of Vic Lambeau. He was an EPA scientist. He worked with fish and also looking at what was coming off of landfills that were near coastal areas. And doing that, he got really interested in Hymenocalis because we have native Hymenocalis, although they grow in South America and Africa and other places as well. So he started collecting them and had probably the best collection of Hymenocalis spider lilies in the world. He aged to the point where he could not maintain them, went to a home, and through a long process, the Arboretum and Juniper Level Botanic Garden, our partner with this symposium, were given permission to go and collect them, and we brought in other botanic gardens and really saved his collections, his records that went with those collections, and so we're offering some to y'all now. But really, it's important to conserve these collections. And speaking,
we had a question about Viburnum. Can we help Kathy out? She was wondering what the growing conditions of the Viburnum that Doug talked about a moment ago.
Sure. The Viburnum, it'll grow in shady areas. That's where it was growing, where we saw it. It probably won't flower, its best, and it's a pretty big plant, so it may get a little bit loose and leggy. But it's really going to flower its best and look its best and everything if it's in more sun. So sun to part shade to grow it, the most sun to get the most out of it. But I've got one in my house in a relatively shady spot, part shade, and it flowered like crazy. And it was a single plant, and it's got some fruit on it. And it only had a single flower head this year because it's a young plant. So I think it's gonna fruit for me well with just a single plant ultimately.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Speaking of collections, one collection that we have here at the Arboretum are the sacred lilies, Rhodia japonica. These are plants that grow in China and Japan, and are the Japanese in particular are really just lovers of this plant. And there are lots of different forms, and there are whole naming conventions around them. And every year they put out new guidelines for judging them and ranking them. And it's a real cultural part of some areas of Japanese horticulture. Not everybody in Japan does that. But the Rhodia are super easy plants to grow for the most part. You plant them out in a shady spot, just let them grow. The plain green ones, the species, will offset and spread. They'll have not very showy flowers kind of down at the base, but then those are followed by red fruit, which will often germinate, but just really close by the parent plant. We have a whole slew of specialty ones that we put in, and we just brought a couple of them out for you. So this one is called Nobori Ryu. Ryu, R-Y-U, means dragon, and it's used in different ways with different Japanese plants. But this Rhodia japonica Nobori Ryu, when you use Ryu with Rhodia, it almost always refers to this dragon ridge down the plant. So the leaves are almost pleated. Sometimes it'll be almost like there's the leaf is growing, like this, so it's triangular or perpendicular to itself. And over time, it'll become a bigger and bigger clump. It'll offset. This is one of the quicker of the Dragon Ridge ones to offset. If you don't want to grow them outside, you can grow them in a pot as a houseplant. They're great that way. That's the way they're generally enjoyed in Japan, these specialty ones. I love these a lot. This one is Sekai Nishiki. Again, with Japanese plants, when you see that Nishiki, looks like Nishiki, but pronounce it Nishiki, that generally means it's variegated in some way. It means brocade. This is one, the Sekai Nishiki, that has these longitudinal stripes that go right up the leaf. It usually has a white margin as well. There are some different cultivars that don't have that white margin but have the streaking up the middle. There are ones that have light streaking, ones that have even brighter streaking, but this is one that is very, very coveted because it's a nice, large, robust plant, and it has really nice variegation. And generally, these plants, as they get older, you'll get even more variegation on there. Really striking plants. And this is one that you'll often, if you look at the fruits, you'll often have variegated fruits, red with some streaking on there. And usually, if you sow those streaked fruits, you'll get some sort of variegated offspring. Won't necessarily look as good as that. Now, this is another interesting one. Some like it, some hate it. It's called Shiro Bhutan. And it's, instead of being streaked like Sekai Nishiki, although you often get these, the variegation is longitudinal, it's in sections and can be really broad. Some leaves can be almost completely white, but it's real variable in how the variegation is shown. And I really think when you start getting a bigger clump with multiple rosettes on there, it can be really, really an incredible looking plant. And the Rhodia Japonica in general, dry shade is fine once they're established. You want to make sure they get established before abandoning them to their fate. But once they're going, they're generally pretty easy. The more variegated and distorted and curled, sometimes the more temperamental they are. This kind of culture in Japan, the quicker it is and easier it is to die, the more valuable it is. And I'm going to turn it over to Doug to talk about another group of plants we have a big collection of that are treated in the same way in Japan.
Yeah, I have 4 cultivars of Ardesia japonica, the Marlberry. The typical wild type would have a plain but handsome glossy leaf with a scalloped edge. But these are 4 examples of the many variegated cultivars of Ardesia japonica. They vary in the color of the variegation and the placement of the variegation. And, some of the leaves are more sort of scalloped edge than others. This is Toxengo. I left my glasses at home today. Hanagaruma and Kusetsu. And, this is also supposed to be Kusetsu. Okay. They are little evergreen plants, and in a cold zone 7 winter, they will die to the ground and return in the spring. These variegated cultivars, I think, are little treasures and might be best appreciated in a container that can be given a bit of cold protection from the cold in the winter. And under those conditions, the foliage would remain attractive year-round. They are called Marlberry. They have little white to pink flowers in the spring, and then sort of pea-sized red berries that persist for a long time through the winter. If planted in the garden, they're a plant for the shade garden. I don't think they would be happy out in hot sun. Here at the Arboretum, we have them probably more for our Cotonenge display. And whereas the Rhodia, our collection is also for the Cotonenge display, I agree with Mark that the Rhodias are, even the fancy ones, are perfectly good planted in the garden. But these are a little bit more delicate than the Rhodias, but really beautiful little treasures.
Go ahead, do another one while you're...
Okay. Another collection of plants that we have in part for the Cotonenge display are a number of Cymbidium orchids. Most people know the big tropical Cymbidiums. The plants are quite large and the flowers are often sold for corsages, if corsage is something that still exists. But there's quite a few Cymbidiums in the auction. Some of them would be reliably winter hardy in zone 7. Others probably need a milder winter than zone 7. And this is a selection of Cymbidium Goringianum. And Cymbidium Goringianum is often winter hardy in zone 7. This one has a slight variegation, a light cream margin to the foliage. And they have little flowers, often sort of green or bronzy color, sometimes white, I guess in the spring primarily. But they are little evergreen plants, so they do have a presence in the garden year-round.
Excellent. And the Cymbidiums are ones that in China, they kind of treat like we talked about the Rhodia and the Ardesia growing in pots, and we'll bring them in often during the winters. But they're easy house plants because they tolerate, they're woodland plants. They tolerate quite a bit of shade. So easy in that sense. So I love that. This is kind of a question mark. We love sharing plants that we know nothing about. We always like to find out about the plants, and we think a lot of our folks do as well. So this is a butterfly bush, Budlia. We got it from a good friend of ours in the Netherlands, and all we know is it's a Budlia from Brazil. So Brazil has some very high areas, some areas where there are hardy plants that come from there. Not a lot of trees and shrubs, but there are some. So there's a possibility that this is hardy, but we are not guaranteeing yet. If you live a little farther south, a little warmer climate, you might be better. If I got this, I might grow it in a container, and if it got real cold, put it in the garage, bring it back out, let it get pretty big, and then plant it. But you could stick it in the ground. They're super easy to propagate, so you could back it up if you wanted. If you're like me and you have too many plants anyway, you might want to plant it in the ground, and if it dies, oh well, you can put something else in that spot. All we know about it is it's from Brazil. It's got this incredible dark foliage on top, real nice glossy, real white backsides to the leaves and white stems. A lot of the southern hemisphere butterfly bushes are not like the Chinese ones that we grow, the common ones, in that they will flower on last year's growth. You know, we can cut back our the other butterfly bush. They'll come up in the spring and they'll flower. A lot of these have more white flowers, not quite as showy, and they flower in the spring. So this may be like that. It may not. We don't know. Sun, good drainage, we assume.
I've been amazed at how stiff the leaves are. They're really, almost like rigid plastic.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. And we don't know, some of the Mexican and South American plants, like Budlia cordata we grow here, grow to big trees in Mexico. They use them as parking lot trees in Mexico, Budlia cordata. It does not grow into a tree for us. It's just a little too tender, in that it'll die back in a typically cold winter. Not necessarily these very mild winters, but who knows? If you're from the South, stake that sucker up and let us know if it's an evergreen tree for you. So we don't know. This one might not be hardy. So I'm going to go ahead and go on to one that we know isn't hardy. This is Ficus, the fig genus, Ficus Bengalensis. So from Bengal area of India. This is one called Bengal Sun, and it's a chartreusey gold leafed plant. So it'll grow into a nice big house plant. Real easy to grow. It's kind of like the rubber plant, Ficus elastica, that's often grown as a house plant. It'll have that same milky sap in it. That can irritate some people, but you can grow it. It's real easy to root. If it gets too big or you want to share it, just whack off some. This was about this big when it was stuck in the pot and rooted. So thumb-sized cuttings on there. Stick it, keep it moist. It'll root. But it's a real showy plant. It's great for putting in containers outdoors to make kind of a showy statement, putting in beds. This came to us from Dan Benarsic at Chanticleer Gardens up in Wayne, Pennsylvania, where they know how to put on displays. But grown inside as a house plant, it's really beautiful and kind of lights up a space. So Ficus Bengalensis, Bengal Sun. This is 100% tropical. It's not even surviving our mild winters outside.
Some of us do grow houseplants. I love them.
I know, not me. You got to water them.
Shall I continue?
Please.
This is a cast iron plant, an Aspidistra. It's Aspidistra sichuanensis from Sichuan, China. Dappled expectation. Aspidistra sichuanensis is one that's hardy here in Zone 7. And this is another collection Mark made in China. And can you see the variegation well enough on this? It has the most amazing variegation. It might be my favorite of the spotted Aspidistra, but it has this sort of, like you're a little woozy and, things are shifting in front of your eyes. It's really a beautiful and amazing variegation. But these are young divisions. The leaves will get, almost twice as wide. This is about full height, and it's quite robust. It'll soon make a great big clump. But, the cast iron plants are so good for shade gardens, even dry shade gardens, because you get this gorgeous foliage year round. And
again, houseplants. That's how I learned it.
True.
Started growing in Zone 6, and we called it the barroom plant because you could grow it in a bar with no windows, and people could, at that time, put their cigarettes out in it and water it with beer and it'd stay alive.
Yeah, and I think it was the Victorians who gave it its name of cast iron plant because it'd be grown in those coal-heated houses where everything got a layer of soot from the coal fires. And I imagine those heavy drapes were drawn most of the day, so it put up with bad air and cold temperatures and low light. So yes, it's certainly a superb houseplant for a colder climate or somebody who doesn't have garden space.
And doesn't like to water.
Doesn't like to water. They're pretty drought tolerant. I love Rosa Sharon, Hibiscus syriacus, not from Syria, but from Asia, the Far East as opposed to the Middle East. And there have been variegated forms with variegated foliage around for forever, it seems, but that most of them have these crunchy little flowers are about as beautiful as the Brussels sprout. So it's really nice to have one with a normal flower. This is Hibiscus syriacus mihanii, obviously named for somebody with the family name of Mihan. And so you'll have these lavender hibiscus flowers most of the summer and the beautiful foliage throughout the frost-free part of the year. Rosa Sharon's super easy, part sun, quite drought tolerant once it's established. Doesn't like it when it gets terribly dry, but just normal moisture is all it needs.
And it's how cold? I'm Zone 6 for sure.
But Zone 6 certainly.
Is it even colder than that? I don't know.
I would think probably into Zone 5. It's the national flower of Korea.
Right, and it's cold.
I'm sure there's milder parts of Korea, but most of Korea is, well, you know far better than I do, it's a cold country.
Yeah.
We had those growing in Chicago.
Had them growing in Chicago. Well, there you go.
Did they die to the ground in Chicago over winter?
Nope.
Yeah, well, then that's what, zone 5, 4?
We was relatives. And as far as I know, my aunt had it in front of her her home.
Yeah.
And they were huge.
Yeah.
They were old. I don't know how old their home was, but they were there for decades. They were the biggest ones I have ever seen.
Yeah.
So.
It's amazing that's, you got the tropical hibiscus that everybody knows, you know, Hawaii, the Fiji, whatever, and then these that are that cold tolerant. Okay. Doug and I are avowed Southerners in terms of our gardening, at least in recent history.
Well, you know, plant breeding project, work with the tropical ones and the Rose of Sharon and come up with all those gorgeous colors in the tropical ones. Mm-hmm. That'd be amazing, you know, winter hardy shrub, hibiscus with flowers this size that are all these wonderful orange and scarlet sunset colors.
Wouldn't that be something?
Yeah. Next auction.
That's right. It's funny you say that. Our plant breeder, our newest plant breeder here at NC State, has been working with Hibiscus syriacus as part of his graduate project and has some interesting things happening. Okay, this next one may not look like it, but it is a fern. I always say I don't know my ferns well enough. I have to go to Doug and ask him what ferns are because they're spend too much time looking up at trees. Luckily, some ferns, like these tongue ferns, grow on trees. So when I look up, I actually see them sometimes. This is Pyrosia lingua being tongue, Keikan, Keikan. And as you can see, it is a creeping fern. And this would normally be growing on a tree. We don't grow it like that here. It gets a little cold for it during the winters. But it'll grow in average garden soil. Where you have best luck, though, is on a slope. It doesn't like to grow flat. Every time somebody tells me they've killed it, it's because they're growing it on a real flat surface. So if you grow it just on a slope, I've got some steps in my garden, and I have them growing kind of where the beds come down to those steps, and they just creeps down along beside the steps in between some boulders and is spectacular. In fact, it's so vigorous in that spot, I keep dividing it and moving it around to other areas of the garden. Now, if you have a flat spot, if you have a flat garden, you don't have anywhere, this is a shade plant, so you want it under some in a woodland. And what I tell people is just take a log, find a log, put it down, build soil up to it and kind of over it. It'll settle a little bit, but get good soil and plant right near the top of it. And that you've gotten that slope. It doesn't need much of a slope. It's gotten that slope. It'll creep along there, and that log will break down over time, but you'll have built up organic matter, and it really works really well to do that. So there are a lot of these tongue ferns. Keikan will get, it stays fairly narrow fronds, but then has the frilly edges along there. It's evergreen. I'll go through after winter and cut out some of if they're older leaves that have gotten spotty or not looking so good. And then the new ones come out kind of covered in silvery scales on there. And the backs are, the beautiful rusty brown. And since it all stands up, if you put it somewhere where you can see around it, you really get a sense of all that, which I love. Love these plants, and there are a lot of different ones out there. In the auction, we have some unusual species of this. Mostly you can find Pyrosia lingua, maybe Pyrosia polydactyla, but we have some other species like I believe we have Pyrosia porosa in there, which is great. And actually some probably not very hardy ones from Costa Rica, but if you go terrariums or want to grow them inside, they're great for that. So I mentioned that one growing on trees, which an epiphyte, that's what an epiphyte is, something that grows on trees normally. We have another one. This is a gesneriad, so a relative of our African violets, gloxinia, that kind of thing. This is, oh, thanks, no tag in it. I'll never get the
Buxifolia.
Yeah, the Askin.
Oh, Aschenanthus.
Aschenanthus. There you go. It's A's and E's and Y's and S's and T's and H's and C's and all those stuff. Somebody's putting it in the chat right now, I'm sure. But whatever, Aschenanthus buxifolius. Buxus is boxwood, and if you look at that, that's very much a boxwood-looking leaf. However, unlike boxwood, it has bright orange-red flowers on it. It is just gorgeous. So if you look in any resource, they will tell you this is a tropical plant. This one particular was collected by Steve Hootman at the Rhododendron Species Foundation. I can't say that it is hardy in Zone 7, but I can tell you it was fine this past winter in my garden. A mild winter.
Yeah, in the Lath house, it came through the winter as an evergreen shrublet. It lost not a single leaf.
Mine too. No damage, mild winter, high shade.
16. Didn't we 16. Go down to 16?
And so, I think a lot of these gesneriads are much hardier than we give them credit for. I grow this like I grow the pyrosia in either in perfect soil like our Lath house, or do it on a slope where it has that is allowed to grow. I actually this spring there was one piece that had grown more than the others, and this will kind of make a little bit longer branches and kind of squiggle around. I cut it off and it broke it. I didn't even cut it into several pieces and just stuck it right into a rotted log that I had there, and every single one of them rooted right there. So, African violets are like that. They're really easy. I think a lot of these gesneriads have so much more hardiness than we think they do. It's all about positioning them right. It's all about where they were collected. Give this one a shot. No guarantees that it's a true Zone 7 down to the bottom of that, it's going to survive. But I think, you throw a couple Christmas tree branches on it and, hey, you've got better than average chance of survival. Really excited about this. It will creep a little bit like a lot of epiphytes. I think it'll make a nice little mat ultimately, and those flowers, oops, sorry about that for those who blew their ears out on headphones. It is gorgeous.
And some of the Aschenanthus that are grown as houseplants are known as lipstick plants. Many of them are trailing and are grown in hanging baskets, and then the flowers sort of extend out from the trailing stems. Completely different plant. Two selections of Stachyurus praecox. The spike tail, though most of us just call it Stachyurus. Late winter blooming shrub, one of the most dramatic plants in the garden at that time of the year. Pendant spikes of almost yellow-green flowers, very showy. But then the rest of the year, they're fairly quiet plants. But these are two very beautiful variegated forms. This is Gold Joy, isn't that the name?
Golden Joy.
Golden Joy. It's a solid gold leaf, and it gets a lot better than this. Sport of Forever Joy. Yeah. Joy Forever. Joy Forever. Yeah, both of these, I just realized now, don't have labels. And then this is one called just Variegata. And the plant in the garden has a lot of leaves that are really boldly splashed with yellow. So it's a real colorful plant all through the summer months as well. They're shade to light shade plants, more drought tolerant than like Viburnum plicatum and oakleaf hydrangea, but they're sort of the ones to wilt after those have wilted. So not for a very dry garden, but one where you can water it during an extended dry spell, but otherwise really good garden plants. Okay. Those of you who join us often probably already know that I love Akuba. I grew into loving Akuba. I did not always love Akuba, but man, I do now.
great shade plants, once established, nice and drought tolerant. And so we've got several Akuba in this in the auction, and we've got some really, really good ones. So if you like the variegated ones but don't want the gold dust plant, this one, Shigetsu, I'll try and hold it steady for our camera, really boldly variegated. These Akuba with that really bold central variegation really need to get some sun. Don't want to be out in full blazing sun, but if they're in dense shade, they tend to really green up quite a bit. You don't have that really bold gold, so get it out in some sun. But this is a bigger plant, big leaves, super showy. It is a knockout. Now, if you don't have room for a big plant, you might try this one, which is called Akuba Japonica hessetera. Not sure what that means, but this is one that is very much smaller, has smaller leaves. They all tend to be kind of curled over and down, has just irregular splashes, sometimes really bold, sometimes small, sometimes it's half a leaf. But I found it to be pretty stable, doesn't revert too much. But I am sure you will get reversions on this. And if you get a stem with solid green leaves, just pluck that off and get rid of it. But this is really going to make a much lower plant. Shigetsu may get 6 or 8 feet tall. Hessetera is probably more 3-4 feet after a long time. Now, if you're not tacky like me and you like your plants without variegation, we've got a couple of great ones in there of that as well. This one with kind of a broader leaf and a little bit smaller habit is one called Pink Champagne that is a female. And I should mention on these other ones, Hessetera, I believe, is a male. And Shigetsu, do you remember?
I don't remember.
The best variegated ones are almost always male, so they won't get the fruits. But, that's when if you look like that, do you really need, talk about gilding the lily with bright red fruit. But these green ones that we have are both females. So this Pink Champagne has the typical maroon flowers, maroon to green flowers, and then gets, instead of the typical bright red fruit, it's kind of a washed out red, pink, if you will. It is not the color that you paint your newborn daughter's room, but it's pink adjacent, let's say. But makes a really nice evergreen shrub. I mentioned the woman in England in charge of the national collections who sniffed at me when I was talking about them and said, "Ugh, kind of parking lot plants, aren't they?" And I thought, parking lot plants are plants that live. So yes. This other green one is one that's called Yamaguchi Giant Female. So it came from Mr. Yamaguchi in Japan, who does a lot of collecting in Japan and China. So I'm not sure where he collected this one, but it's a big honking plant, big leaves, really wants to grow upright, big red fruits, super showy. I'd love to go and talk to him and ask him where he actually collected this. He doesn't do any social media or email as far as I know. But I'm wondering if maybe this has some Akuba omiense in there, which is a much bigger leaf tree-like plant. And this shares some characteristics with that, but it's definitely not just that. So really cool plant. You do need to have a male around, so you can do a variegated one to provide pollen for these. A lot of ones that are out in the trade are male, so you could get those pretty easily.
Okay. I don't think enough use is made of camellias in our gardens. They certainly add year-round interest, but most camellias bloom either fall, winter, and very early spring when there's not an overabundance of things blooming, especially late fall and the winter months. And here are two selections of Camellia Japonica, and there's other camellias in the auction. This is Piemonte. It's what's known as a holly-leafed camellia. The leaves are very glossy and have this sort of sawtooth edge to the leaf, sort of like a holly. but it has big, open-centered red flowers. I think the variegated selections of Camellia add that year-round interest that the plain green one doesn't. There's two in the auction that are almost identical in leaf, but differ in their flower color and form. This is Urgella. The other one is George Hamilton or Jeff Hamilton. But both have this very beautiful marginal variegation. And, they don't need any more care than any other Camellia Japonica. They're easy gardens for light shade to part sun, quite drought tolerant once they're established. So real treasures in the garden for year-round color. Arboretum introduction is this hybrid Edgeworthia snow globe, not to be confused with snow cone. This is something Tim Alderton, the horticulture technician, found here as a seedling. And we believe it's a hybrid between the two species, or now forms of one species of Edgeworthia, Papyrifera and Chrysantha. So it's not as big as Chrysantha, but has the tough nature, the easy to please nature of the larger growing Chrysantha, with only getting maybe about 4 or 5 feet tall rather than 8 foot tall. But the same incredible display of silky flower buds all winter, and then the very fragrant flowers starting probably about January or February. An easy, shade garden plant. Really one of the stars of the winter garden.
Okay. Now, this one may be tricky for us, but we do ship. This is a rhododendron. It was collected by Dan Hinckley, who's one of our speakers at our symposium in North Vietnam, up in the mountains in northern Vietnam. We haven't seen it flower yet, but it's a rhododendron in what's called the Madenii. I'm pronouncing that right?
I think so.
Madenii group, which typically have large, white, fragrant flowers. They grow, this was collected in Vietnam, but this group is Bhutan, northern India, North Vietnam, those kind of areas at pretty high elevations. Most of the group does not like to take real cold, freezing temperatures. But most of them don't like really, really hot temperatures. Now, some are okay, but fair warning on this. No guarantees. It's made it through another seedling from a nearby collection of this, has made it through one summer and one winter for me. Looking pretty good under high shade. So maybe it'll do, but we'll see. Give it a couple of years. I grow it on a slope. I think it's going to be real susceptible to Phytophthora root rot. I think that's probably what does it in a lot of cases in warm temperatures. So I grow it on a slope so it never sits in water and the water kind of moves through it. But usually these Madenii are kind of tricky in nurseries, and this one's been, it looks great, and it's so high hopes for it. Well, moderately positive hopes for it in this area, but we'll ship it to somewhere where you have perfect temperatures, if you like. All right, this tree was one of my bucket list ultimate desire trees. This is one I looked for years and years and years, and it was hard to find. It is Carpinus, the hornbeams, Carpinus fangiana, named for a Asian botanist, Dr. Feng, who did a lot of work in Yimeishan and Sichuan and Yunnan and some areas, a lot of areas of China. It's in the Yukon. I call it Feng's hornbeam. Most in Britain and U.S. they call it the monkeytail hornbeam, and that's because the female flowers, like all hornbeams, are in racemes and little catkins for the male flowers. The females are nice and long, but where it really shines is when those start forming the seeds and they elongate even more. And on the best forms, they can be 24-inch long.
Wow.
These, monkey tail like racemes, and they're pale green. And so when you have a nice big tree, it's nice dark green foliage, and then these pale green going up and then drying to brown. It is just, in my mind, one of the most spectacular things. I don't have a big property. This gets to be a tree. I have 2 of these planted. I don't spare the space for 2 trees of the same species very often, but it's just a great plant. One of my prized possessions is a picture of me with Roy Lancaster in England in his garden, standing in front of this amazing tree. This is most likely from the Shanghai Botanic Garden collection that came into the West they collected it in Hubei or Hunan. It's in the auction description, but there have been several discrete collections of this, and based on where we got our plant, I'm pretty sure it's that Shanghai collection.
It's one I've only seen in photographs, and it's stunning in fruit. It's absolutely stunning, and Carpinus are beautiful small trees. You're describing it as a tree. Would you still describe it as a small tree, or?
It's on the medium side of small. It gets a little bit larger than some others.
I want to make sure we talk about these 2 new red buds.
I agree.
As probably everyone in the audience knows, NC State and the Ralston Arboretum has the world's leading redbud breeder, Dr. Dennis Werner. And we have 2 redbuds that, this one hasn't been released. I don't believe that one's been released, but probably will be maybe next year. But this is one that isn't even named yet, but it's one that Dr. Werner has decided is worthy of introduction. I'm very familiar with one of the original plants of this. The original plant was propagated and planted in several locations, and it has this gently weeping habit, not strongly pendulous like the other ones, but it's a much slower growing, smaller for a long time at least tree than straight Cercis canadensis. And I suspect this plant, which we got a couple days ago, hasn't been grown in full sun because one of the original plants out in full sun, it's one that we see every day when we're here, is just as dark black purple as possible all summer long. So really good color all summer long. It has the typical purpley flowers of Cercis, like most Cercis, but really striking growth habit. It's really handsome habit in the winter as well without the foliage. So one that we're really happy that Dr. Werner has decided to introduce. And you could be the very first person other than the plants that are in trial now to have one in your own garden.
Yeah, and be on the lookout. Once it gets a name, we'll be putting that in our communications and things. But yeah, no name yet, and I was amazed that Denny let us have it, and it looks pretty darn good. And I will say this about the plant. Denny let me know he would let us put one in the auction, which I was very, very pleased about. And he told me what size it was so we could put a description in. And then he followed that up with a text that said, I've been in Colorado for a couple of weeks and haven't seen my plant. I hope it looks okay. And I'll say for a plant that has been neglected in hot early summer, 90-degree temperatures, that looks pretty darn good in the container. So it's looking like it's going to be a great plant.
And I thought I should also add that this is the typical size leaf. It's the smaller leaf. One of its parents is Ace of Hearts, which has this very sweet little heart-shaped leaf. So a more delicate texture than a straight Cercis canadensis.
Yeah. And if you ever want to know why it holds its purple better than others, find me here at the Arboretum one day when you don't have, 20 or 30 minutes, and we'll do a botany lesson, and I'll explain it all to you. Now, another red bud from the amazing breeding program of Denny Werner and in collaboration with the J.C. Ralston Arboretum is this greenleaf one. Those of you who follow us may remember when we introduced pink pom-poms, which is a really nice, upright, very vigorous, double pink flowered red bud. Well, this is white pom-poms, which, as you may have guessed from the name, is a nice, vigorous, upright, double white flowered form. Not quite as vigorous as pink pom-poms, which is one of the fastest growing red buds I've ever seen, but still a really good grower. Now, a lot of people don't like the little bean pods that form on red buds. I like them. I think that's a part of what the tree looks like and transitions through. But the nice thing, if you don't like them with these, the pink pom-poms and this white pom-poms, is because the flowers are doubled, they're functionally sterile. You can get a little pollen out of there if you have some good graduate students, but otherwise you're not getting any out. So white pom-pom. So again, early spring, you get these double flowers just coating this plant. It's really to die for. And the one time I've seen it in flower, I was not allowed to take pictures of it. It was too early. So sorry about that, but awesome plant. Sun shade to shade, great thing. And we're probably at the end of our time here. Happy to answer any questions people have about these plants, about any other plants in the auction, about anything else that you might be interested in.
You ended it right at 4 o'clock, and I'm not talking 4:01 or 3:59. 4 o'clock.
Well, I feel like I cheated people because I think we didn't start till 3:02. So, but.
So everyone, as a reminder, we do have the speakers attached so they can actually hear your questions. Go ahead and unmute yourself with all of your questions. It's been a quiet group. I guess I've been studying the auction and bidding, and they even asked for the bidding numbers, which I've been giving them. So go ahead and ask your questions, everyone, in the chat, or preferably on audio or with audio.
And I do want to mention, we do this auction, and sometimes the numbers get really high, and that's great. And I just want to remind people that, we are self-supported, and these auctions and sales and things are one of the ways that we pay salaries and we keep the lights on and those kinds of things. So if it helps, think of it like a donation where you get a really cool plant in return. Rather, it's not a way to get cheap plants. Come to our plant sale, become a member, come to our giveaway if you want cheap or free plants. But, our auction is really a way for people to show their support.
So we do have a question. This one's from Marilyn. She wants to know a little bit more about Ardesia. She's wondering if it wants moist or dry soil, or does it hate wet feed, etc.?
So the plain green leaf form, which is a real nice, vigorous ground cover, once it's established, it is incredibly drought tolerant. I would have never said that before. I would have said good woodland plant, nice humusy soil, and I think it's happiest there. But I grew it under an old evergreen Asian oak, and it was just spreading. It was beautiful. Now these variegated ones tend to be a little more persnickety. I grow them in a bit nicer soil, although I've got some in some areas where I haven't amended, and they're it's not the best soil. And I don't water. I don't know if I've mentioned that before, but I don't water houseplants or outdoor plants, except for a short while after planting them. And I've never lost a one. Some of the variegated ones are a little more tender, and if we have a really cold winter, they can be lost outright. but a lot of them will die back to the ground in a moderately cold winter, but then sprout back up. But they're spreading plants, so again, they make good house plants. So you can pluck off one little piece with one little tiny root, put it in a little pot, put it on a windowsill where it gets, you know, a little bit of light, and it's there for the next year.
Thank you, Mark. And no one else has come up with a question. I think this is maybe a record. I think I may have only answered 1 or 2 questions in the chat as well.
All right, we put people to sleep.
No, they're all bidding in the auction.
All bidding in the auction. I need people to bid because I am currently accounting for roughly 20% of the bids, and have the most money bid. And that was not to run up prices or anything like that. That was all things that I want, but you can't always get everything you want, or you may be kicked out of your house by your wife. So people need to bid on some plants.
Maybe they'll do that for you.
One thing that we did not mention here, you know, we're partners with Juniper Level Botanic Garden, and they have a whole bunch of plants that they've added, and we've gotten plants from other folks. And some of the most desirable plants, if you want an entertaining evening, go on eBay and Google variegated agaves, and you will see these agaves with gold centers, gold margins, tropical ones, hardy ones being sold for $300, $400, $3,000, and they'll be for a little offset tiny thing. Juniper Level Botanic Garden is one of the purveyors of those, one of the people who buys some of those and discovers them. And Tony has put in some incredible variegated agaves in the program, and they're nice, good sizes, and you will not get them somewhere else but this auction or eBay for $1,000.
So Kiki just asked if bidding starts on Friday, and bidding is already open. We started last Friday for the auction. And what also might happen is that not all of the plants may be in the auction quite yet. We're adding new plants almost every single day for this auction. So keep on checking back frequently for new additions, and the bidding is open right now.
Yeah, that's, you know, people ask why we open it so early, and it's really, if you have, you know, 24 hours to try and look at these lists of plants, it can be overwhelming. Many of them are very, very new or very, very unusual. When you know, we put descriptions in, but if you're wanting more information, Google it, and sometimes it's, you know, an Ouroboros. You come right back to J.C. Ralston Arboretum with the information that we put on there, and there's not much else. And often you'll get bad information as well. So be careful. Anything you read on our website is, you know, gold. But yeah, and we're happy to answer questions, you know, by email between now and the auction ending at 4:30 Eastern Time on Saturday, the 11th.
And I think it was said, but these plants will be at the Sheraton Raleigh Hotel for the auction with the Southeastern Plant Symposium. So those of you joining us live and in person will be able to see the plants live and in person as well.
Yeah, and all information about pickup, shipping, anything like that. We will ship plants that are smaller, you know, a gallon and smaller for the most part. All that information, when you go to the auction site, before you put in your information to go into where you can bid, there's a whole long thing with information in there. If you read all that, it will answer an amazing number of questions that you will otherwise ask us.
That takes care of all the questions, Mark. There's lots of kudos, of course. So thank you so much for a great presentation to both of you. Thank you, Doug, and thank you, Mark.
Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Great to see you. And we will see you again next week.
Looking forward to seeing you all in the symposium, whether it's in person or online. And of course, next week for the midweek program, where we're talking about the asparagus family. See you then. Bye, everyone.